You know, some stories begin with magic and adventure. But this one begins with a lie told by a trembling girl in a wedding dress, standing before the most feared creature in the kingdom. And honestly, what happens next still gives me chills every time I think about it. The carriage wheels groaned against the frozen mountain path, each rotation bringing Elena closer to a fate worse than death. Or so the village elders had warned her. She pressed her palm against the frost-covered window, watching her breath create small clouds that disappeared almost instantly in the bitter cold. Her wedding dress, borrowed from 3 different families because her own was too poor to afford one, scratched against her skin like a punishment she hadn't yet earned. 22 years old, she thought. 22 years of surviving, and this is how it ends. The kingdom of Valdris had maintained an ancient agreement with the vampire court for over 3 centuries. Every 30 years, when the blood moon rose highest, a bride would be sent to Castle Morvain. In exchange, the vampires would protect the human villages from the shadow beasts that roamed the Darkwood forest. This year, Elena had been chosen. Not because she was beautiful, though she possessed a quiet, unassuming prettiness that people often overlooked. Not because she was noble. Her father was a blacksmith, her mother a seamstress who had died when Elena was just 7. She had been chosen because she had no one. No family who would mourn too loudly, no lover who would demand vengeance, no children who would grow up with hatred in their hearts. Elena was, in the eyes of the village council, expendable. And the worst part, she had volunteered. The castle emerged from the mist like a creature rising from deep water, ancient, impossibly tall, its black spires piercing the gray sky like accusations against heaven itself. Elena's hands trembled, but she forced them still. She had learned long ago that showing fear invited cruelty. The orphanage had taught her that. The years of working in households where masters saw servants as less than furniture had reinforced it. You are not afraid, she told herself. You are not afraid, you are not. The carriage stopped. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence pressed against her ears like cold hands, and she could hear her own heartbeat, fast, desperate, alive in a way that felt almost rebellious given the circumstances. Then the door opened. Elena had expected guards, soldiers, perhaps chains. Instead, she found herself staring at an elderly man in simple butler's attire, his silver hair neatly combed, his expression kind. "Lady Elena," he said, extending a gloved hand to help her down. "Welcome to Castle Morvain. My name is Benedict. I have served this house for 47 years, and I will be honored to assist you during your stay." His hesitation on that last word wasn't lost on her. Stay, she thought bitterly, as if I'm a guest who might leave. But she said nothing. Instead, she accepted his hand and stepped onto the ancient cobblestones, her borrowed shoes immediately soaking through with cold water from a nearby puddle. Perfect, she thought, almost laughing. I'm going to meet the vampire king looking like a drowned peasant. At least I'll be a memorable meal. The interior of Castle Morvain defied every expectation Elena had built in her mind during the 3-day journey. She had imagined darkness, cobwebs, perhaps skeletons chained to walls or bloodstains on the floors that servants had given up trying to clean. Instead, she found warmth. Massive fireplaces roared with welcoming flames in every room they passed. The walls were lined with books, thousands of them, in every language imaginable. Tapestries depicted not battles or conquests, but gardens, forests, families gathered around tables laden with food. And everywhere there were flowers. Fresh flowers in crystal vases, dried flowers in decorative arrangements, painted flowers on the ceiling murals, carved flowers in the wooden banisters. Elena stopped walking, her confusion overwhelming her fear for just a moment. The flowers, she whispered. Why are there so many flowers? Benedict paused, and something flickered across his aged face, something that looked almost like grief. The king's mother loved them, he said quietly. She planted the first garden here 400 years ago. When she passed, His Majesty continued the tradition. He says the flowers remind him that beautiful things can grow even in the darkest places. Elena blinked. The Vampire King tends gardens. Before she could process this information, they arrived at a massive set of double doors, carved with intricate patterns of moons and stars. The Great Hall, Benedict announced. His Majesty is waiting. Elena's brief moment of wonder evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold grip of terror that had been her constant companion since the selection ceremony. This is it, she thought. Whatever happens next, there's no going back. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked through the doors. The Great Hall was enormous, a cathedral of shadow and candlelight, with ceilings so high they disappeared into darkness. Hundreds of candles floated in the air, held aloft by magic Elena couldn't begin to understand. And at the far end, sitting on a throne carved from a single piece of black crystal, was the Vampire King. King Damien Moraine. The Eternal Knight. The Blood Sovereign. The monster who had allegedly killed 300 soldiers in a single battle, who could move faster than lightning, who hadn't shown mercy to an enemy in over 500 years. Elena had expected a beast. What she found was a man. He appeared young, perhaps 30 in human years, though she knew he was ancient beyond counting. His hair was dark as midnight, falling in slight waves to his shoulders. His features were sharp, almost severe, with high cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from marble. But his eyes. Oh, his eyes. They were the color of aged blood, deep red with flecks of gold that caught the candlelight. And in them, Elena saw something she hadn't expected. Exhaustion. Profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The kind that comes not from lack of sleep, but from centuries of carrying a weight too heavy for any soul to bear. He looked at her, and she felt the world narrow to just the two of them, prey and predator, mortal and immortal, bride and whatever he intended to make her. So, he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest, you are this year's sacrifice. Elena's fear wanted her to bow, to kneel, to beg. Instead, something else rose within her, something stubborn and fierce that had kept her alive through 22 years of hardship. I am not a sacrifice, she heard herself say. I am a volunteer, there's a difference. The king's eyebrows rose slightly. A volunteer, he repeated. You chose this. Yes. Why? The question was sharp, almost demanding. Elena could feel the weight of centuries pressing against her, the ancient power that radiated from this creature who could snap her neck before she even registered the movement. But she had survived too much to lie now. Because there was a girl in my village, Elena said quietly. 15 years old. Her name is Maria. She has a mother who is sick, a father who works 3 jobs, and 2 little brothers who worship the ground she walks on. The council selected her first. I couldn't let her come here, not when I had nothing left to lose. The silence that followed was absolute. King Damien rose slowly from his throne, and Elena felt her heart stutter as he descended the steps toward her. Each footfall was silent, predatory, inevitable. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint blue veins beneath his pale skin, smell the strange combination of winter frost and ancient books that seemed to cling to him. You traded your life, he said slowly, for a girl you barely knew. Elena met his crimson eyes. I traded my death, she corrected. My life was never really mine to begin with. Something shifted in his expression, something that looked almost like pain. "What is your name?" he asked, though she was certain he already knew. "Elena, Elena Vasquez." "Elena," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his voice, older, heavier, more significant. "Do you know what happens to the brides who come to this castle?" She had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. "You drain them," she whispered. "Slowly, over months, you keep them alive just long enough to—" "Lies." The word cut through her sentence like a blade, and Elena stumbled back in surprise. King Damien's eyes flashed with something hot anger, yes, but not directed at her. His jaw tightened, and for just a moment, he looked not like a monster, but like a man who had been wounded in a way that would never heal. "Everything your people believe about me," he said quietly, "is a lie." Elena's mind spun. But the brides never return. In 300 years, not a single one has ever. Because they don't want to. What? King Damien turned away from her, walking toward one of the massive windows that overlooked the moonlit mountains. "The first bride came to me in 1724. Her name was Catherine. She was terrified, just as you are. She expected death. Instead, I gave her a choice. Stay here in safety, with access to education, art, music, and freedom she would never have found in her village, or return home with enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of her life." He paused. "She chose to stay. They all chose to stay. Not because I forced them, but because for the first time in their lives, someone treated them like they mattered." Elena's legs felt weak. That's impossible, the stories. "Were created by me," he said flatly. "I am the most feared creature in this kingdom, Lady Elena. If your people believed I was a benevolent protector, how long do you think it would take before someone tried to exploit that? Before nobles demanded more protection, before kings tried to control me, before my power became a weapon for human politics." He shook his head. "Fear protects me. Fear protects them. The villages I guard have not seen war in 300 years. Not because I am kind, but because everyone is too afraid to test my anger." Elena felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She had prepared herself for death, for pain, for horror. She had not prepared herself for this. "Then why?" She struggled to form words. "Why do you take brides at all?" King Damien turned back to face her, and in the candlelight, she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Loneliness. Absolute, crushing loneliness. "Because even monsters get tired of being alone," he said softly. "And because—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "Because of a promise I made long ago, a promise that I am still trying to keep." Elena wanted to ask what promise, who he had made it to, why he looked so unbearably sad when he spoke of it. But before she could speak, something happened that neither of them expected. The sleeve of her wedding dress, cheap, poorly stitched, borrowed from a woman twice her size, caught on a nail protruding from a nearby table. Elena stumbled, her arm jerking backward, and the fabric tore with a loud rip. Her forearm was exposed. And on that forearm, clearly visible in the candlelight, were scars. Dozens of them. Old and new, layered over each other like a map of suffering. The marks of someone who had lived through abuse that went far beyond anything a normal childhood should contain. Elena gasped, frantically trying to cover her arm, shame flooding her cheeks with heat. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Please don't look at." But King Damien had already seen. He moved toward her, and Elena flinched, expecting disgust, expecting anger, expecting him to realize that she was damaged goods, broken merchandise that wasn't even worth the effort of keeping alive. Instead, he stopped. And slowly, carefully, he extended his own hand. "Palm up." "Look," he said quietly. Elena looked. And there, on the pale skin of his wrist, were scars of his own. Old scars, ancient scars, Scars that must have been made with silver because they hadn't healed the way vampire wounds normally did. Elena's eyes widened. You. I was not always a king, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was not always powerful. There was a time long ago when I was just like you, a creature with no control over my own fate, surviving day by day, wondering if the next sunrise would be my last. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes, tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed in years. How did you survive? She whispered. King Damien met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and uncertain, like a flower blooming in frozen ground. Someone believed in me, he said. Someone saw what I was and loved me anyway, and she made me promise that one day I would do the same for someone else. Elena's heart was pounding so loudly, she was certain he could hear it. The brides, she breathed. You're not taking them as sacrifices, you're saving them, he confirmed. The way I was saved. Every 30 years, the village councils select the woman they consider most expendable, the orphan, the outcast, the broken one that nobody wants. And I give her a life she never dreamed possible. Elena didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She had walked into this castle expecting a monster. And instead, she had found. What had she found? Your Majesty, Benedict's voice suddenly echoed through the hall, cutting through the charged atmosphere. Forgive the interruption, but there is an urgent matter. The Shadow Council has arrived. They demand an audience, tonight. The warmth drained from King Damien's face instantly, replaced by something cold and dangerous. They're early, he said flatly. They weren't supposed to come until the new moon. They claim there is a situation, Benedict replied, his voice tight with concern. Something has awakened in the Darkwood Forest, something that should have stayed dead. King Damien turned back to Elena, and she saw conflict warring in his ancient eyes. Elena, he said, and the sound of her name on his lips made something flutter in her chest. I must attend to this matter. Benedict will show you to your chambers. You are safe here. No one will harm you. I swear it on my blood. He turned to leave. But Elena, driven by an impulse she didn't understand, called out, Wait. He stopped. The promise, she said. The one you made, who did you make it to? King Damien stood perfectly still for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried 500 years of grief. My sister, he whispered, the night she died in my arms. Then he was gone, vanishing into the shadows so quickly that Elena wasn't sure he had ever been there at all. She stood alone in the great hall, her torn sleeve exposing her scars, her borrowed dress soaking up the cold from the ancient floor. And for the first time in 22 years, Elena Vasquez felt something stir in her chest that she had long ago given up for dead. Hope. But as she turned to follow Benedict to her chambers, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the corner of the hall, partially hidden by shadows, there was a portrait. A portrait of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a dress covered in embroidered flowers. And beneath the portrait, a small plaque read, Lady Rosalina Morvain, beloved sister, 1156-1189. She taught the monster how to love. But that wasn't what made Elena's heart stop. What made Elena's heart stop was the face in the portrait. Because despite the different hairstyle, despite the centuries that separated them, despite everything that logic and reason told her was impossible, the woman in the portrait looked exactly like Elena.